For introduction, the Imperial Navy's destroyer force played an important role in the Pacific War. It was integral to the period of Japanese expansion from December 1941 until May 1942, and then played a central role in the bitter battles around Guadalcanal from August 1942 until February 1943. In the campaign in the Central and Northern Solomons through the rest of 1943, Japanese destroyers were essentially left to fend for themselves against the increasing power of the U.S. Navy. These superb offensive platforms performed well in the initial period of the war, but as the American offensive in the South Pacific and later the Central Pacific gained speed, the weaknesses of Japanese destroyers were ruthlessly exposed. This second volume on the Imperial Navy's destroyer force will cover the ships of the Osashio, Kajero, Yugamo, Shimakaze, Akazuki, and Matsu Tachibana classes, totaling 93 units. It will not repeat information already provided in the first volume. See New Vanguard 198 on destroyer tactics and weaponry and sensors carried aboard Japanese destroyers. Japanese destroyer design principles. The destroyers covered in this volume, principally the Osashio, Kajero, and Yugamo classes, constituted the core of Japan's wartime destroyer force. These ships were at the center of almost all significant operations. The Osashio, Kajero, and Yugamo classes, the latter two classes referred to by the Japanese as Type A units, were essentially a return to the special type ships from the late 1920s. Since all were designed for maximum firepower and speed, and were built without reference to treaty restrictions. These ships continued the Japanese emphasis on a heavy torpedo armament. A heavy gun armament was also an important design criterion, but these weapons were in a dual purpose, which proved a major weakness later in the war. When combined with inferior anti-submarine sensors and weapons, the result was an imbalanced design. Type A units were superb torpedo boats, but lacked the attributes required for a truly successful fleet destroyer. The large Type B, or Akazuki class, was a better balanced design. These ships featured a reduced torpedo armament, but included a true dual-purpose gun battery. However, these large ships were too complex for mass production and, of the 12 units produced, most entered service too late to make a difference. Japanese naval strategy and role of the destroyer. The course of the Pacific War did not go as the Japanese planned. In large measure, Japanese destroyers were designed for the anticipated climactic naval clash between the American and Japanese battle fleets, during which the Imperial Navy's destroyers would play a featured role. Because the Japanese were locked into a position of numerical inferiority in capital ships via a series of interwar naval treaties, Japanese destroyers were part of an elaborate attrition strategy that included fleet engagements at night to reduce the American advantage in battleships. Such an engagement never occurred in the Pacific War, but the tactics, training, and weapons devised for night battles provided the Japanese with an edge in a series of smaller battles in the early and mid stages of the war. In spite of their success in most of these early battles, Japanese destroyers took heavy losses. 11 were sunk in the Guadalcanal campaign and another 25 were lost in the Solomons or Bismarck Sea during 1943. These losses were serious and could not be replaced. In fact, one of the primary reasons cited by the Imperial Navy for its desire to end the Guadalcanal campaign was that mounting destroyer losses would make it impossible to fight the expected decisive battle successfully. The Imperial Navy's destroyer force, so powerful and successful at the beginning of the conflict, was virtually annihilated by Thur's end. Osashio class design and construction. The Osashio class, ordered as part of the 1934 reinforcement program, became a prototype for the next two classes of Imperial Navy destroyers. Laid down beginning in 1935, the entire class of 10 ships was completed between 1937 and 1939. The overall layout of the class proved successful in service and created a powerful ship that also presented a graceful and balanced appearance. By this time, the Japanese had decided to ignore treaty limitations and built the new class of destroyer to meet requirements set by the Naval General Staff. The London Naval Treaty, which restricted the maximum size of destroyers and the Imperial Navy's overall destroyer tonnage, did not expire until December 31, 1936. But this inconvenience did not trouble the Japanese. Compared to the preceding Shiratsuyu class, the length of the hull was increased by almost 30 feet and displacement was increased by almost 300 tons. The primary difference compared to the previous class, aside from a generally less cramped appearance, was the adoption of a heavier gun armament. The third twin-type C5 mount was fitted in a superfring portion on the aft deckhouse, as on the special-type destroyers. The Osashio class featured improved boilers that operated at higher temperatures. The three boilers drove to turbines and to shafts and generated 50,000 shaft horsepower SHP. This meant that in spite of the greater displacement, the top speed was 35 knots, 1 knot faster than the preceding Shiratsuyu class. Though the Japanese were happy with the design, there were problems. The sea trials of the lead ship, Osashio, produced unsatisfactory steering results. Subsequent ships in the class were provided with a modified stern and improved rudder, which gave a much more compact turning radius. The entire class had problems with the turbines, and it took until the start of the war to modify all ships. Armament and service modification. Osashio class was fitted with a heavy armament, greater than almost all foreign contemporaries. The main gun battery was 6 5-inch guns in 3 Type twin mounts. The ship's primary offensive punch was the 2 Type 9 quad torpedo mounts. Each was provided with 4 reloads, making a total of 16 embarked torpedoes. The only anti-aircraft weaponry was 2 Type 96 twin 25mm mounts fitted amidships, forward of the second stack. These were the first destroyers to receive the new Type 96 guns. As the war progressed, the Japanese were forced to augment the anti-aircraft fit of their destroyers. This was carried out in several stages. The first augmentation, carried out in 1942-43, was to swap the twin mount salmon ships with triple mounts and to place a twin 25mm mount on a bandstand forward of the bridge. The second phase, during 1943-44, entailed the removal of the super-firing 5 mount in favor of 2 to 5 triple mounts. This confirmed the failure of the Japanese 5 guns as anti-aircraft weapons. The third stage, conducted in 1944, was to fit between 8 and 12 single 25mm guns on the main and forecastle decks. In addition, Kasumi received 4 single 13mm guns. Only 4 ships, Asagumo, Kasumi, Michishio, and Yamagumo, survived into 1944 to receive the full anti-aircraft augmentation and radar. Other important changes included the addition of a No-22 radar on the modified foremast above the bridge and a No-13 radar on the leading edge off the mainmast aft. The ships began the war with paravanes on the stern for sweeping moored mines and 16 depth charges deployed by either a Type 90 for double-sided projector or stern drop stands. Later in the war, the paravanes were removed and the number of depth charges carried was increased. To compensate for this extra top weight, one of the spare sets of reload torpedoes was removed. Nevertheless, total displacement increased to 2,000 tons. Wartime service at 10 Osashio class units began the war assigned to destroyer divisions 8 Osashio, Arashio, Michishio, Ushio, 9 Asagumo, Minagumo, Natsugumo, Yamagumo, and 18 Orari, Kasumi, and Takajiro class units. By 1944, only 4 ships survived, and 3 of these were moved into Division 4. The class saw heavy action during the war, and none survived. Orari, the ship began the war assigned to the Pearl Harbor attack foreseen remained with the carriers through the Indian Ocean raid in April. She was assigned to escort the invasion convoy for the Midway operation. In June 1942, she conducted escort operations to Kiska Island and the Aleutians. She was hit by a single torpedo from the submarine USS Growler in July 5 that year off Kiska and sunk. Arashio, she was assigned to support the invasion of Malaya and Dutch East Indies at the start of the war. She escorted the support group at the Battle of Midway in 1942, came under air attack, and suffered 1 bomb hit with 37 dead on June 6. She returned to service in December, conducted 8 transport runs to New Guinea, and then participated in the evacuation from Guadalcanal. She was lost to air attack on March 4, 1943 in the Battle of Thebes. Mark C. Asagumo. She was assigned to support the Philippines and Dutch East Indies invasion at the start of the war. During the Battle of the Java Sea, she sank the British destroyer Electra on February 27, but was damaged by cruiser gunfire. She was involved in the Midway operation. During the Guadalcanal campaign, she participated in the carrier battles of the Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz, 9 transport runs, and the First Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, where her torpedoes finished off the American destroyer Laffy. She was also present at the Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. She survived the battle off Bismarck Sea in March 1943. In May 1943, she moved to northern waters and participated in the evacuation of the Japanese garrison from Kiska. She was involved in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. During the Battle off Light Gulf, she was assigned to the Southern Force. During the Battle off Surigao Strait on October 25, 1944, the American destroyer McDermott fired a single torpedo salvo that sank or crippled 3 Asashio-class ships, including Asagumo. Asagumo had her bow blown off and was later sunk by gunfire, with only 39 survivors. Asashio. She was assigned to support the invasion of Malaya and the Dutch East Indies at the start of the war. On February 19 to 20, 1942, in the Battle of Botong Strait, she sank the Dutch destroyer Piet Hein and later damaged a Dutch cruiser and an American destroyer with gunfire, but was hit and damaged in return. She was assigned to escort the support group at the Battle of Midway and came under air attack. She suffered 1 bomb hit with 22 dead. In October, she was sent to Guadalcanal. She participated in the naval battles of Guadalcanal in November, but was not engaged. She was sent to Japan in January 1943 for a quick refit, and returned to Rabaul in time to escort a large convoy from Rabaul to Leh. During what became known as the Battle of the Bismarck Sea on March 4, 1943, she was pounded by multiple bomb hits. She quickly sank with all hands. Kasumi. She began the war assigned to the Pearl Harbor attack foreseen and remained with the carriers through the Indian Ocean raid in April 1942. She was part of the escort for the invasion convoy in the Midway operation. On July 5, she was hit and damaged by a torpedo from the submarine U.S. Roller off Kiska. She returned to service in June 1943. She survived the Battle of Surigao Strait on October 25, 1944, and then conducted operations in the Philippines area, including to convoys to Light. She returned to Japan in February 1945 and was assigned to escort super battleship Yamato on her mission to Okinawa. She was sunk on April 7, 1945 by air attack. Machicio. She was assigned to support the Philippines and Dutch East Indies invasion at the start of the war. During the Battle of Botong Strait on February 19, 1942, she was surprised by 2 old American destroyers and heavily damaged by gunfire, being left dead in the water with 64 casualties. After repairs, she arrived in Rabaul in October 1942. After 3 transport operations, she was heavily damaged by American air attacks on November 14 and eventually towed back to Japan. She participated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. At the Battle of Surigao Strait, on October 25 she was hit by a torpedo from the destroyer McDermott. She sank, leaving only 4 survivors. Menegumo. She was assigned to support the Philippines and Dutch East Indies invasion at the start of the war. During the Battle of the Java Sea, she and Asagumo dueled with British destroyers, sinking 1. She participated in the Midway operation. During the Guadalcanal campaign, she was involved in the carrier battle of the Eastern Solomons, but was then damaged by air attack on October 5 and forced to return to Japan. She went back to Rabaul in March 1943, but on her first transport mission to Columbangar Island in the Central Solomons she was engaged and sunk by radar-controlled gunfire from American cruisers and destroyers in Kula Gulf on March 6. Natsugumo. She was assigned to support the Philippines and Dutch East Indies invasion at the start of the war. She was involved in the Midway operation. During the Guadalcanal campaign, she participated in the battle off the Eastern Solomons and 3 transport runs, but was caught by American aircraft on October 12, 1942 near Savo Island and sunk. Bushio. She was assigned to support the invasion of Malaya and the Dutch East Indies at the start of the war. On February 19 to 20, 1942, in the Battle of Botong Strait, she assisted Asashio in sinking the Dutch destroyer Piet Hein. Later she was heavily damaged by gunfire and did not return to Okshin until January 1943, when she participated in the evacuation from Guadalcanal. On February 20, she was torpedoed and sunk by the submarine Albacore off New Guinea. Yamagumo, she participated in the invasion of the Philippines, but struck a mine in Lingayen Gulf on December 31, 1941, and suffered heavy damage. Following repairs, she was assigned to convoy escort duties through early 1944 and sank the American submarine Sculpin on November 19, 1943. She participated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. At the Battle off Surigao Strait on October 25, she was struck by 3 torpedoes from the destroyer USS McDermott. She sank into minutes, leaving 2 survivors. Kajero class design and construction. Kajero class was the first class known as Type A by the Japanese. Building on the success of the preceding Osashio class, the Japanese were very content with the design and capabilities of this new destroyer class. The Kajero class compared favorably to other foreign designs built at the same time. For example, compared to contemporary American destroyers, the Kajero ships had a heavier gun armament but were not dual-purpose, like the American 5-inch guns, and had a much heavier torpedo armament when their reloads were factored in. The Osashio and Kajero classes. The Osashio class was the basis for the next 2 classes of Type A destroyers. The top view is of the lead ship of the class, Osashio, as she appeared in 1941. The Osashio class returned to the main battery layout of the special type Fubuki class destroyers, with a single twin 5-inch mount forward and 2 aft. The 2 quadruple torpedo launchers amidships constituted the ship's primary offensive power, and both were provided with reloads. The anemic anti-aircraft fit up to twin 25mm mounts can be seen amidships. The second ship shown in both profile and overhead views is the famous Yukikaze. This view is her configuration in April 1945. Yukikaze was a Kajero-class ship, but her general appearance was similar to the Osashio class. Like all Japanese destroyers surviving until 1944-45, her appearance was altered by efforts to improve her anti-aircraft capabilities. The super-firing turret aft was replaced by 2 25mm triple mounts, a twin 25mm mount added on a bandstand in front of the bridge, and the original twin 25mm mounts were replaced by triple mounts. 14 single 25mm guns were added to various spots along the deck edge. The ship's foremast has been modified to allow the placement of a No-22 radar. The compartment built low on the foremast's radar room. A No-13 radar is visible on the mainmast aft. All 8 were Osashio and Kajero units were modified in this manner, though the exact number of single mounts varied. The first 15 ships of this class were ordered in the 1937 program. The final 4 units, sometimes referred to as the Arashi Group, were ordered as part of the 1939 program. This brings up an interesting point. Most published head histories have only 18 ships in the Kajero class. Recent research in Japan indicates that Akigumo was actually one of the last Kajero-class ships built, not one of the first Yugumo-class units. This can be traced to post-war official string to make sense out of pre-war building plans, which included a number of fictitious destroyers inserted into the plans in an attempt to conceal the extent of the resources devoted to the Yamato-class battleships. The result was the mislabeling of Akigumo as a Yugumo-class unit. In fact, she had Type EC-5 in mounts, not the Type D mounts on the Yugumo class, and had one of these later replaced by 25mm triple mounts like other Kajero-class units. As built, the Kajero ships were virtually identical to the preceding Osashio class. The hull was nearly identical, as was the bridge structure. The only major discernible visual difference was the movement of the reload torpedoes for the forward torpedo mount from an abaft position to forward of the launcher. The Kajero ships possessed a slightly greater displacement and increased set beam to improve stability. They demonstrated some increase in boiler efficiency, which produced 52,000 St. Helena pounds, but this did not result in any increase in speed. Amatsukas received a new type of experimental boiler that developed higher pressure, but there was no real increase in performance. Armament and service modification is completed. The arrangement of the armament was identical to the Osashio class. Alterations to the Kajero class were again similar to the Osashio ships, and focused on the augmentation of the anti-aircraft fit and the addition of radar. In 1942-43, the twin 25mm mounts amidships were replaced by triple mounts and a twin 25mm mount placed forward of the bridge. On all surviving units during 1943-44, the super-firing 5 inches mount aft was removed and replaced with 25 mm triple mounts. Finally, during the second half of 1944, the 7 surviving ships received a number of single 25 mm and 13 mm guns. This varied from the 7 single 25 mm guns on Isakaze and Hamikase in June 1944 to the 14 25 mm and 13 mm guns on Yukikaze. Also during the war, many of the scuttles were welded over to prevent flooding and surviving ships received armor plating around the bridge. Hamikase was the first Japanese destroyer to have radar fitted in late 1942 when she returned to Japan for a refit. Since the Kajero ships were frontline units and heavily engaged in the Solomons campaign, they were given priority for receiving radar. Other ships got their radars when they rotated home for repair or refit. At least one ship, Naoki, had the No-22 radar attached to the foremast without creating a platform, but most had their foremast modified to fit the No-22. All 7 ships still afloat past mid-1944 also received No-13 radar on the leading edge of the mainmast aft. The Kajero ships began the war with paravanes on the stern and 16 depth charges deployed by either a Type 90 for double-sided projector or stern drop stands. With the removal of the paravanes, depth charge stowage was increased to 36 and 2 rails placed on the stern. Wartime service ships were at the heart of the Imperial Navy's destroyer force. They constituted several destroyer divisions to 4, 15, 16, 17, and half of 18. Akigumo, the ship began war assigned to striking force. She stayed with carriers through the Battle of Santa Cruz in October 1942. She scuttled the American carrier Hornet with torpedoes at Santa Cruz. She participated in the evacuation from Guadalcanal in February 1943. She was active in the Solomons in early 1943 before participating in the successful evacuation from Kiscangeli. She returned to the Solomons and participated in the Battle of Vella La Vella in October. She was sunk by the submarine USS Redfin on April 11, 1944 off the Philippines. Amatsukas. She participated in the invasion of the southern Philippines at the start of the war. She was assigned to support the invasion of the Dutch East Indies and participated in the Battle of the Java Sea on February 7, 1942. She was involved in the Midway Operation escort to the invasion convoy. During the Guadalcanal campaign, she participated in the battles of Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz. During the first naval battle off Guadalcanal on November 13, she sank the American destroyer Barton with torpedoes, but then was damaged by cruiser gunfire and forced to return to Japan for repairs. She was assigned to General Escortades and torpedoed by the submarine Redfish on January 16, 1944 in the South China Sea. She lost her bow and suffered 80 dead. She was repaired at Singapore and was sunk on April 6, 1945 by B-25s near Amoy, China. Arashi, the ship, began the war as part of the Malaya and Dutch East Indies invasion forces. In March 1942, she assisted in sinking several Allied ships fleeing Java, including a British destroyer and an American gunboat. She participated in the Midway Operation as part of striking force. She moved to the South Pacific and engaged in several transport missions to Guadalcanal and points on New Guinea. She participated in the Battle off Santa Cruz and later the Battle of Vella Gulf on August 7, 1943, and was one of 3 Japanese destroyers surprised by American destroyers and sunk by torpedoes and gunfire. Hagikaze. She was assigned to support the invasion of Malaya at the start of the war, then assigned to escort striking force and participated in the Midway Operation. She began operations off Guadalcanal in August 1942 and was heavily damaged by a B-17 on August 19. She re-entered service in February 1943 and was assigned to support operations in the Solomons. After several supply missions beginning in April, she participated in the Battle off Vella Gulf on August 7 and was sunk by torpedoes and gunfire. Hamikaze, she was assigned to escort striking force at the start of the war and remained with carriers through Midway Operation. She participated in the Battle of Santa Cruz for missions to Guadalcanal and the evacuation from the island in February 1943. She was heavily engaged during the remainder of the Solomons campaign, being present at the battles of Kula Gulf and Kolombangara in July 1943 and the Battle off Horanyu in August. She was damaged by air attack on August 26 and forced to return to Japan Kajero at Pearl Harbor. This view shows Kajero, lead ship of her class, steaming through heavy seas on December 7, 1941. Kajero was assigned as part of the Pearl Harbor striking force. 7 of the 9 destroyers assigned to the raid were Kajero-class units, since at the beginning of the war these were the most modern destroyers in the Imperial Navy. Kajero is in her early war configuration. The presence of the torpedo reloads abreast the forward stack indicates she is a Kajero-class unit, as opposed to the almost identical Osasio-class participated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. She was assigned to the 1st Diversionary Attack Force, also known as the Center Force for the Lady Operation, and was slightly damaged by air attack. In April 1945, she was assigned to escort Yamato. She was sunk by air attack on April 7. Hatsuka's, she was assigned to support the invasion of the southern Philippines at the start of the war. She participated in the invasion of the Dutch East Indies and also in the Battle of the Java Sea on February 27, 1942. She was involved in the Midway operation as escort to the invasion convoy. She participated in the battles of the Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz. She was hit by a launched torpedo off Guadalcanal on January 10, 1943 and forced to return to Japan. She was sunk with all hands during the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay on November 2, 1943 after a collision with the heavy cruiser Miyoko and was then destroyed by American destroyer gunfire. Hayashio. The ship began the war assigned to the Philippine and Dutch East Indies invasion forces. She was involved in the Midway operation as part of the invasion force. During the Guadalcanal campaign, she participated in the battles of the Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz, 3 transport missions to the island, the mid-October bombardment of Henderson Field, and the unsuccessful mid-November convoy to that island. She was sunk by air attack on November 24, 1943 off Lae, New Guinea. Isakaze. She was assigned to escort striking force at the start of the war and remained with carriers through the Midway operation. During the Guadalcanal campaign, she participated in the battles of the Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz and the February 1943 evacuation. On August 18, she was involved in the indecisive battle off Horanyu against 4 American destroyers in the Central Solomons. On October 6, 1943, she participated in the Battle of Vella La Vella. She was damaged by a mine on November 4 off Kavieng and forced to return to Japan for repairs. She participated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. She was assigned to the 1st Diversionary Attack Force for the light operation. She returned to Japan in November and was assigned to escort Yamato. She was damaged by air attack on April 7, 1944 and later scuttled. Kajero. She was assigned to escort striking force at the start of the war and remained with carriers through the Indian Ocean raid in April 1942. She participated in the Midway operation as part of the invasion convoy. She moved to the South Pacific and was involved in the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, 10 transport attack missions to Guadalcanal, and the Battle of Santa Cruz. She was present at the Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal in mid-November and the Battle of Tassafaring on November 30, 1942. She conducted Donather for supply runs to Guadalcanal and supported the February 1943 evacuation. After a brief refit in Japan, she returned to the Solomons, was damaged by a mine on May 8 off Colombangar and then finished off by air attack. Kuroshio. The ship began the war supporting the invasion of the southern Philippines and then participated in the invasion of the Dutch East Indies. She was involved in the Midway operation as part of the invasion convoy. She moved into the South Pacific and participated in the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, 3 transport missions to Guadalcanal, the mid-October bombardment of Henderson Field, and the Battle of Santa Cruz. At Tassafaronga, her torpedoes may have been among those that crippled the heavy cruiser USS Pensacola. From December until February 1943, she participated in 7 supply runs and all 3 evacuation runs to Guadalcanal. After a brief refit in Japan, she returned to the Solomons and was sunk by a mine on May 8 off Colombangar. Maykazi. She began the war as part of the Malaya and Dutch East Indies invasion forces. In February 1942, she was assigned to escort striking force and stayed with the carriers throughout the Midway operation, the Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz. She participated in the evacuation from Guadalcanal and was damaged by air attack. After repairs, she was assigned to general escort duties. She was caught at Truk during an American carrier attack in February 1944 and sunk by cruiser gunfire northwest of Truk with all hands. Natsushio, the ship was assigned to the Southern Philippine Invasion Force at the start of the war. She became the first of 39 Japanese destroyers to be sunk by submarine attack when she was torpedoed off Makassar in Dutch East Indies on February 8 by the American submarine USS S-37. She sank the next day. Naoki. She began the war as part of the Malaya and Dutch East Indies invasion forces. In March 1942, she assisted in the sinking of several Allied ships departing Java. She participated in the Midway operation as part of the striking force. She stayed with the carriers for the Eastern Solomons and later was present at Santa Cruz. She was involved in at least 4 supply missions to Guadalcanal. During the last, on December 7, 1942, she suffered moderate damage from air attack and was forced to return to Japan for repairs. She was caught at Truk during an American carrier attack in February 1944, but was the only Japanese ship to escape from an American surface task group that included the battleships Iowa and New Jersey. She participated in the Philippine Sea operation. She was assigned to the 1st Diversionary Attack Force for the light operation and sunk by cruiser and destroyer gunfire off San Bernardino Strait on October 26, 1944 with the loss of approximately 1,000 men, the entire crew of the destroyer and the rescued survivors from the heavy cruiser Chikuma. Oyashio. She was assigned to the Southern Philippine Invasion Force at start of the war, and then was active in the invasion of the Dutch East Indies. She participated in the Midway operation as escort to the invasion convoy. She was involved in the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, led 3 transport missions to Guadalcanal, and then participated in the battleship bombard of Henderson Field in mid-October 1942. She participated in the Battle of Santa Cruz in October. In November, she engaged in the Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. On November 30th, she played a key role in the Battle of Tassafaronga, when she possibly torpedoed the heavy cruiser Pensacola and more likely torpedoed the heavy cruiser Northampton, which later sank. She conducted several more supply missions to Guadalcanal before arriving in Japan for refit. Upon her return to the Solomons, she struck a mine off Columbangara, and was then sunk by air attack on May 8, 1943. Shiranui, the ship was assigned to escort striking force at the start of the war and remained with the carriers through the Indian Ocean raid in April 1942. She participated in the Midway operation as escort to the invasion convoy. She was heavily damaged by the submarine USS Growler on July 5 off Kiska. Repairs were not completed until November 1943, after which she was assigned to general escort duties. She participated in the light operation as part of the 2nd Diversionary Attack Force and fought at the Battle of Surigao Strait. She was sunk by American escort carrier aircraft on October 27, 1944 with all hands. Tanakaze. She was assigned to escort striking force at the start of the war. She stayed with carriers through the Midway operation, during which was slightly damaged. She participated in the Battle of Santa Cruz and then undertook supply missions in December-February 1943, including the evacuation of Guadalcanal. In July 1943, she participated in the Battle of Kula Gulf and contributed to the torpedo barrage that sank the light cruiser Helena. She was assigned to general escort duties until sunk by the submarine USS Harder near Tawi-Tawi on June 9, 1944. Tokitsukas. She participated in the invasion of the southern Philippines at the start of the war. She was assigned to support the invasion of the Dutch East Indies, participated in the Battle of the Java Sea on February 27, 1942, and in the Midway operation as escort to the invasion. Convoy. During the Guadalcanal campaign, she was involved in the battles off the Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz. In January-February 1943, she was active in several supply and then evacuation missions to Guadalcanal. She was sunk by air attack on March 4 during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. Urukazi. She was assigned to escort striking force at the start of the war and remained with carriers throughout the Midway operation. She participated in the Battle off Santa Cruz and 6 missions to Guadalcanal and New Guinea through 1942. In 1943, she was involved in the evacuation from Guadalcanal and later undertook general escort duties, including several convoys to New Guinea. She participated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. She was assigned to the 1st Diversionary Attack Force for the light operation and was slightly damaged by air attack. She was sunk by the submarine USS Ceylon on November 21, 1940 off Formosa with all hands. Yukikaze, the most famous ship of the Kajero-class destroyers and perhaps any Japanese Pacific War destroyer, Yukikaze began the war at Acehto, the southern Philippines invasion force. She participated in the invasion off Dutch East Indies, including the Battle of the Java Sea. She was involved in the Midway operation as part of the invasion convoy. She arrived in the South Pacific in time for the Battle of Santa Cruz and then was heavily engaged during the First Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, during which she was only lightly damaged. She participated in all 3 evacuation runs from Guadalcanal in February 1943 and survived the Battle of Bismarck Sea in March. She was engaged in the Battle of Colombangara in July and assisted in the torpedoing of 3 American ships. She was present at the Battle off Philippine Sea in June 1944. She was assigned to the 1st Diversionary Attack Force for the light operation and emerged unscathed. She escorted Yamato in April 1945 and suffered only light damage on April 7 when Yamato was sunk. She survived the war to be turned over to the Nationalist Chinese in 1947 and remained in service until 1966. She was finally scrapped in 1970 after a campaign to return her to Japan failed. Yugamo class design and construction. The Yugamo class was the ultimate refinement of the special type destroyer dating back to 1928. Essentially, the class was a repeat of the Kajero ships with a few minor improvements. The basic layout wasn't changed, but displacement rose by some 45 tons and the hull was extended by a few feet. The first 11 ships of the class were ordered as part of the 1939 program. Another 16 ships referred to by the Japanese as the Hamanami Group were ordered as part of the 1941 program, but of these 8 were cancelled before being started. Another 8 ships were planned for the modified 1942 program, but these were also cancelled. The primary difference in appearance from the Kajero class was the shape of the bridge structure. On the Yugamo class, there was a forward slope on the front of the bridge structure, which was meant to reduce wind resistance and improve stability. Unlike the Kajero class, which was built in a standard fashion, the Yugamo class was built in 3 different yards and there were several minor differences between ships. There were actually 3 variants of the bridge structure: early, mid, and late production, 2 variants to the mainmast, and placement of the degaussing cable was evident in 5 different patterns depending on where the ship was built. Armament and service modification. The major difference in armament was the adoption of a new 5-inch twin mount known as Type D. This mount was capable of a maximum elevation of 75 degrees, making it more suitable for anti-aircraft work. This is why units off Yugamo class never had one of their aft 5-in mounts removed in favor of additional 25mm mounts to increase anti-aircraft protection. Though the increased elevation did make the Yugamo ship's 5-inch battery nominally capable of anti-aircraft work, in fact the Type D was a poor dual-purpose mount, since it possessed slow elevation and tracking speeds and was unable to sustain high rates of fire. As with the Sashio and Kajero-class ships, as the war progressed, the aircraft fit of the Yugamo units was increased. Early units carried only 2.25mm mounts forward of the aft stack. Surviving units and those completed later in the war had these replaced by 2 triple mounts and had a twin mount added forward of the bridge structure. Units surviving into 1944 had a second set of 25mm triple mounts added on a platform abaft the forward stack. Additionally, the 6 units surviving into 1944 received up to 12 single 25mm guns. Kiyoshimo also received a small number of single 13mm guns. Other important changes included the addition in 1943 of No-22 radar in the modified foremast. Naganami had her foremast modified to Provideo platform for the radar. By 1944, surviving ships also received No-13 radar usually mounted on the mainmast. However, Kiyoshimo had her No-13 placed on the foremast above the No-22 set. These ships began the war with paravanes on the stern, and a Type 90 for double-sided projector and drop stands to deploy depth charges. Later in the war, the paravanes were removed and the number of depth charges carried was increased. Wartime service Yugamo-class ships were assigned to destroy divisions 2, 10, 31, and 32. These were considered elite units and were always assigned to escort primary fleet units. Yugamo, October 1943, at the Battle of Vella La Vella. The 19-unit Yugamo class was essentially a repeat of the Kajero class. The only major difference was the shape of the bridge structure. The forward slope of Yugamo's bridge structure is evident in this view Asashio, and Kajero units had no slope. Yugamo has received some mid-war modifications. The amidships 25mm twin guns have been replaced by triple mounts, and a bandstand has been constructed forward of the bridge for a twin 25mm mount. This configuration was typical of all mid-war Yugamo-class ships and was the final configuration for Yugamo before she was lost Kashimo. She joined the fleet in May 1944. She participated in the Battle off the Philippine Sea. In October, she was involved in the Battle of Light Gulf as part of the 1st Diversionary Attack Force, but played no role since she was assigned responsibility for picking up survivors and escorting cripples. She was sent to Manila in November to escort convoys to Light. During these operations, she suffered heavy damage from air attack on November 10 and was forced to return to Manila, where she was hit again by bombs on November 13 and sank the following day. Asashimo. The ship joined fleet in February 1944 and participated in the sinking of the American submarine Trout on February 29. She was involved in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June. She participated in the Battle of Light Gulf as part of the 1st Diversionary Attack Force, but played no role as she was assigned to escort the heavy cruiser Tako back to Singapore. She undertook two convoys to Light in November, surviving heavy air attack. She participated in the San Jose bombardment operation in December. She returned to Japan and was assigned to escort Yamato to Okinawa in April. She was sunk by an air attack with no survivors on April 7, 1945. Fujinami. She began fleet operations in October 1943. She was struck by a dead torpedo on November 5 in Rabaul in an American carrier air attack. She conducted general escort operations in the Central Pacific until March 1944. She participated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. She was assigned to the 1st Diversionary Attack Force for the light operation. She suffered minor damage on October 24 in the Sibayan Sea and the following day in the action off Samar. She scuttled the heavy cruiser Chikai during this action and rescued survivors. She was sunk by carrier air attack on October 27 and lost with all hands Hamanani. She began fleet service in December 1943. She participated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. She was assigned to the 1st Diversionary Attack Force for the light operation but played no significant role in the October 25 action off Samar. She escorted troop convoys from Manila to Leyte and was sunk by American carrier aircraft in Ormoc Bay on November 11. Hainami. She commenced fleet operations in October 1943 and ventured as far south as Bougainville. She conducted general escort operation through June 1944 before being torpedoed and sunk by American submariners Harder on June 7 east of Borneo, with no survivors. Hayashimo. She joined the fleet in May 1944. She participated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. In October, she was involved in the Battle of Light Gulf as part of the 1st Diversionary Attack Force and was struck by a carrier aircraft-launched torpedo on October 26, settling in shallow water, southeast of Mindoro. She was ultimately abandoned on November 12 after salvage efforts failed. Kazegumo. Her first action was the Midway operation, during which she was assigned to the striking force. She remained with the carriers for the battles of the Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz during the Guadalcanal campaign. She conducted several missions to Guadalcanal, including the unsuccessful bombardment of Henderson Field on November 14. In February 1943, she participated in 2 of 3 evacuation missions to Guadalcanal. She was active in operations in the Central Solomons and forced to return to Japan in April after mina damage. She participated in the July evacuation of Kiska. She returned to the Solomons in September and took part in the Battle of Vella La Vella on October 6–7 against American destroyers. In June 1944, she was assigned to take part in an abortive operation to move troops to Biak. She was sunk by the submarine USS Hake off Davao on June 8. Kishinami. She was fully operational in February 1944. On February 29, she assisted in the sinking of the American submarine USS Trout. She participated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. She was assigned to the 1st Diversionary Attack Force for the light operation and was damaged by air attack. She docked in Singapore in early November to repair damage from grounding. She was sunk by the American submarine USS Flasher on December 4, 1944, west of Palawan Island in the Philippines. To 6 KLYONAMI. She began operations in February 1943, performing general escort duties through June. On July 13, she participated in the Battle off Columbangar, during which Japanese destroyer torpedoes crippled 3 lead light cruisers and sank a destroyer. On July 20th, while on a transport mission to Columbangar, she was sunk by U.S. Army Air Force B-25s with only a single crewman surviving, Hiroshima. She joined the fleet in June 1944 and participated in the Battle off Light Gulf as part of the 1st Diversionary Attack Force. She was damaged in the Sabayan Sea by air attack on October 24 and forced to return to Singapore for repairs. She was assigned to take part in the bombardment off the Light beachhead at San Jose, where she was hit by 2 bombs from aircraft and finished off by PT boats on December 26, 1944. Nakigumo, she was assigned to escort the striking force during the Midway operation and remained with the carriers during the Battle of the Eastern Solomons in August 1942. She conducted 3 transport runs to Guadalcanal in October and then participated in the Battle of Santa Cruz. During the battle, she scuttled the crippled American carrier USS Hornet. She was involved in the unsuccessful bombardment of Henderson Field on November 14. Following a brief period in Japan for repairs, she participated in the first evacuation mission from Guadalcanal on February 1, 1943. She was sunk by a mine while trying to avoid an American PT boat attack, but almost all of the crew was saved. Nakanami. She was operational in September 1942 and immediately sent to support operations off Guadalcanal. She participated into bombardments off Henderson Field in October and later took part in the Battle of Santa Cruz. In November, she escorted the unsuccessful troop convoy bound for Guadalcanal. On November 30th, she participated in the Battle of Tassafarango but did not launch any torpedoes because her decks were loaded with supply drums. She conducted 3 more supply runs to Guadalcanal and then led first evacuation run to the island on February 1, 1943, during which she was damaged by air attack. In November 1943, she conducted a troop transport mission to Bougainville. She was sunk by American destroyer torpedoes and gunfire on November 25 during the Battle of Cape St. George. Naganami, she began fleet operations in September 1942 and was immediately sent to support operations off Guadalcanal. She participated in bombardments of Henderson Field in October and later took part in the Battle of Santa Cruz. In November, she conducted a transport run to Iceland, during which she was damaged by air attack, and later she escorted and to 7 ill-fated troop convoy to the island in mid-November. On November 30th, she participated in the Battle of Tassafarango and wasn't damaged. She conducted 3 more supply runs to Guadalcanal into January 1943. Following a refit in Japan, she participated in successful July 1943 evacuation from Kiska. She was involved in the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay on November 2, 1943, and November 11. She was heavily damaged by aircraft torpedo in Rabaul Harbor and forced to return to Japan for repairs. Upon her return to service, she was assigned to the 1st Diversionary Attack Force for the Lady Operation, but missed most of the battle after being assigned to escort the damaged heavy cruiser Takao to Singapore. In November, she was assigned to escort a convoy from Manila to Light, and was sunk by carrier attack on November 11 in Ormoc Bay with heavy loss of life. Okinami, she was fully operational in February 1944. She was temporarily assigned to the Biak transport operation in June before participating in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. She was part of the 1st Diversionary Attack Force for the light operation and suffered minor damage from air attack. She escorted a convoy from Manila to Light in early November, and then was damaged by air attack at Manila on November 5. She was sunk on November 13 by air attack in Manila Harbor. Onami, she entered service in January 1943. She provided cover for the Guadalcanal evacuation in February. She was deployed to Rabaul in October and conducted reinforcement missions to Bougainville and Buca in the Northern Solomons. On November 25, she was sunk with all hands by at least 2 American destroyer-launched torpedoes at the Battle of Cape George on another transport mission to Buka. Tsunami, she began fleet operations in October 1943. She was sunk on November 11 in Rabaul Harbor by a bomb hit from American carrier aircraft with heavy loss of life. Takanami, upon completion, she was assigned to support operations off Guadalcanal. In October 1942, she participated into bombardments of Henderson Field and in the Battle of Santa Cruz. She escorted an unsuccessful troop convoy to Guadalcanal in mid-November. She played a key role in the Battle of Tassafaronga on November 30th. Acting as a scout in advance of the Japanese destroyer force, she drew the bulk of American attention and gunfire, allowing other destroyers to launch torpedo attacks. Before she was sunk by American cruiser gunfire, Takanami was able to launch her torpedoes, which heavily damaged the heavy cruisers Minneapolis and New Orleans. Tamanami. She was fully operational in July 1943. She operated as far south as Rabaul in November. She conducted general escort duties in the Central Pacific until June 1944, when she participated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. She was torpedoed on July 7, 1944 by the American submarine Mingo southwest of Manila, and sank with all hands. Yugamo, the lead ship of the class, was completed a couple of days before the attack on Pearl Harbor, but her first operation was not until the Battle of 28 Midway in June 1942. When she was assigned to escort the striking force. She remained with the carriers in August at the Battle of the Eastern Solomons and in October at the Battle of Santa Cruz. She conducted several missions to Guadalcanal in November, including the unsuccessful bombardment on November 14th. In February 1943, she participated in 2 of 3 evacuation missions from Guadalcanal. She was active in operations in the Central Solomons before returning to Japan in May. She participated in the July evacuation of Kiska and Aleutians. She returned to the Solomons in September and played a central role in the Battle of Vella La Vella on October 6–7 against American destroyers. Yugamo aggressively engaged the American force, but in return was crippled by gunfire. However, her torpedo attack hit the destroyer USS Chevalier, which eventually sank. Yugamo was finished off by American destroyer gunfire and at least 1 torpedo. Shimakaze and construction. The ultimate expression of the heavy fleet destroyer in the mold of a large torpedo boat was the experimental Shimakaze. This ship was a prototype that carried an extraordinary torpedo fit and possessed a very high maximum speed. The design was known as the Type C destroyer and was part of the 1939 program. The new Type C design was based on the Yugamo class design, but to accommodate the addition of a third quintuple torpedo mount, another 25 feet of length was added. The cost and top weight for providing torpedo reloads was too great, so none were carried. To develop the very high speeds necessary to gain a tactical advantage in combat, new boilers and machinery were needed. The new boilers developed very high temperatures and pressure, which in turn developed 76,010 St. Helena pounds. The ship received a new type of turbine, which generated 50% more power than typical turbines used in destroyers. On trials, she developed an impressive 79,240 St. Helena pounds and a speed of 40.9 knots. Such a complex design was impractical in the face of wartime losses, where expediency and simplicity were essential. Therefore, 16 additional Type C units under the 1942 program were cancelled. Armament and service modification. Since her 3 quintuple mounts could be trained to either beam, Shimakaze had the largest torpedo broadside of any World War II destroyer. The main gun battery was the usual 6 5-inch guns in 3 Type D twin mounts, 1 forward and 2 aft. Shimakaze was launched in May 1943 with a No-22 radar on the foremast, triple 25mm mounts amidships, and a twin 13mm front of bridge. In June 1944, she returned to Japan and received a typical mid-war modification. Another set of triple 25mm mounts, 7 single 25mm, and only single 13mm gun were added. Also, a No-13 radar was added to the leading edge of the mainmast. Wartime service for such a potentially extraordinary ship, Shimakaze had a very ordinary character. In an indication of how she was viewed by the Japanese, she was never directly assigned to a destroyer division, but always to her squadron directly. She was one of the first destroyers to receive radar. After joining the fleet in July 1943, her first action was during the second and successful evacuation mission to Kisco on July 29, during which she acted as flagship for the screening force. In June 1944, she was assigned as part of the abortive Biak transport operation, and then participated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Following refit in Japan, she was assigned to the 1st Diversionary Attack Force and participated in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. In the action off Samar, she was enabled to use her impressive torpedo battery since she was loaded with survivors from Japanese cruisers sunk earlier. Subsequently, she was assigned to escort convoys from Manila to Leyte. Shimakaze was sunk by carrier aircraft on November 11 in Ormoc Bay. Akazuki-class design and construction to complement the type of destroyers, the Japanese envisioned another design built to act as anti-aircraft screening units for carriers. As originally conceived, these destroyers called Type B by the Japanese were large and auto-carry for twin mounts of the new Type 98 3.9 in guns. To do so without creating topweight problems, the ships were some 700 tons larger and 50 feet longer than the preceding Type A units. Not surprisingly, the Japanese decided to increase the Type B's offensive potential before the design was finalized by adding a single quadruple torpedo mount with 4 reloads. The final result was a fine multi-purpose destroyer that the Japanese considered their most successful destroyer design. The ship presented a very balanced and powerful appearance, making it most handsome of Japanese destroyers. The 3.9 in mounts were placed in pairs fore and aft, with the number 2 and 3 mounts in a superfirm position. The bridge structure was compact but tall enough to give a field of vision over the number 2 mount. There was a single trunk stack for the 3 Canpon boilers that drove the 2 turbines and produced 52,000 St. Helena pounds, enough to propel the ship at a maximum speed of 33 knots. The layout of machinery was changed so that there were 2 separate engine and boiler rooms in an effort to increase resistance to battle damage. The Yugamo class and unique Shimakaze. The top and middle plates show the Yugamo class ship Kishinami as she appeared in October 1944 at the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The forward slope of the bridge structure is evident, identifying her as a Yugamo-class unit. The late war presence of her super-firing 5 in mount aft also mark her as a Yugamo-class unit, since surviving Asashio and Kajero units had their super-firing mount replaced by 1944. Kishinami's augmented anti-aircraft fit is evident with 4 triple 25mm mounts, a twin 25mm mount in front of the bridge, and 14 single mounts. The 1944 radar fit for Yugamo-class units included a No. 22 on the foremast and a No. 13 set on the mainmast as shown here. Note the paravanes have also been removed and replaced by 2 stern rails for the increased number of depth charges carried. The bottom view is Shimakaze as she appeared in October 1944. Her configuration is similar to a Yugamo-class unit, but with additional length to allow the addition of a 3rd torpedo launcher. All 3 of the mounts are quintuple, making her the only Japanese destroyer so equipped. The late war anti-aircraft and radar modifications are similar to that of Kishinami described above. 6 of this class were authorized in 1939 and another 10 in 1941. Only one of the last 4 was even laid down before all were cancelled. Latter units in the class were completed to a simplified hull shape to decrease production time. Since this class met all expectations, another slightly larger improved group of 16 ships was authorized in the 1942 program with another 22 ships to follow. All of these were cancelled before construction started. Armament and service modifications design centered on the Type 98 3.9 inches gun. Unlike previous 5-in guns mounted on Japanese destroyers, this was a true dual-purpose gun. The gun proved excellent in service, combining reliability and a high rate of fire. Its range was actually superior to the standard American 5 inches destroyer gun. Specifications for the gun are provided below in order to engage aircraft effectively. The ships were fitted with the Type 90 for fire control director capable of tracking high-angle targets. As designed, 1 director was envisioned for each set of forward and aft mounts. The forward fire control director was placed above the bridge and the second aft on a small deckhouse. Production shortages of the Type 94 meant that the last 5 ships never received their second director aft, and eventually these were removed on all ships in favor of an additional triple 25mm mount. The ship's primary offensive punch against surface targets was the standard Type 90 quadruple torpedo mounts capable of firing the Type 93 oxygen-propelled torpedo. 4 reloads were also carried. For anti-submarine ORC, to Type 90 for depth charge projectors and 50 for depth charges were originally fitted. Ships built later in the war were completed with stern rails and storage was increased to 70 to depth charges. In spite of the ship's mission to act as an anti-aircraft ship, initial light anti-aircraft weaponry was limited to an inadequate to twin 25mm mounts placed amidships. Teruzuki was the only ship not modified from this configuration, since she was lost in December 1942. As was the case for all other surviving Japanese destroyers, the anti-aircraft fit of the Akizuki class was greatly strengthened as the war progressed. The twin mounts were replaced by triple 25mm mounts, and another pair of triple mounts was placed abreast the stack. As already mentioned, a fifth triple mount was added in place of the aft Type 90 for director. The final upgrade, which took place in late 1944 or early 1945, added another set of 25mm triple mount sabres the bridge for a total of 7 triple mounts. In this configuration, 20 additional single 25mm guns were added for a total of 41 25mm barrels. At least 5 ships, Fuyuzuki, Hanazuki, Natsuzuki, Suzutsuki, and Yozuki, were so configured. The 4 ships sunk in late 1944, Akazuki, Hatsuzuki, Shimotsuki, and Wakatsuki, were lost with 5 triple mounts and a varied number of single mounts as high as 24 on Hatsuzuki. Nizuki was lost in 1943 with a total of 4 25mm triple mounts. All except Akazuki and Teruzuki were completed with a radar platform in the foremast. Akazuki and all ships completed mid-war received the first Japanese air search radar known as the Type 2 1942 shipboard search radar. Model 1 Modification 2 or more simply No. 21-2 on this platform. The No. 21-2 radar was a large device with a mattress antenna. Specifications for the radar are provided below. In addition to the No. 21-2 radar, ships completed in or surviving to 1944 received the No. 13 radar. This was also an air search radar, and was fitted on the leading edge of the mainmast. The last 5 ships completed during the war replaced the outdated No. 21-2 radar on the radar platform with later version of the No. 20-2 radar, which was maximized for surface search. These ships also received a second No. 13 radar on the foremast above the radar platform. The Akizuki class, arguably the best Japanese destroyer design, was the Akizuki class. The top and middle plates area of Teruzuki is she appeared in 1942. She is representative of the early war Akizuki class configuration. Overall, the ship projects a powerful and balanced appearance with her soft 3.9 and twin mounts, the tall and compact bridge, and the single stack. Note that there is no radar at this point, and that the only light anti-aircraft guns are to twin 25mm mounts amidships. The bottom view is of Shimotsuki as she appeared in October 1944. Among the many changes evident in this late war configuration is the modification of the foremast to allow the addition of a No. 21 radar and the addition of a No. 13 radar on he mainmast. The anti-aircraft fit has been significantly increased and now totals 5 triple 25mm mounts and 14 single 25mm guns. The aft fire control director has been replaced by one of the triple mounts. Wartime service at Akizuki class made up destroyer divisions 41 and 61 and, as intended, were often assigned to carrier screening duty. Their large size also made them ideal flagships, and they were employed in several surface actions in this capacity. Akizuki. She joined the fleet in June 1942 and participated in the carrier battle of the Eastern Solomons in August. In October, she was assigned to escort a large convoy to Guadalcanal and suffered moderate damage on October 25. She was forced to return to Japan for repairs, but returned to Solomon's operations by mid-January 1943. She was torpedoed by the submarine USS Nautilus on January 19 and again forced to return to Japan. She was heavily damaged on March 14 when her keel buckled upon departure from Saipan. She was towed ashore and beached, but was returned to service in October. She participated in the carrier battle of the Philippine Sea. She was assigned to the Northern Force for the Battle of Light Gulf and sunk the probable aircraft torpedo on October 25. with heavy loss of life. Fuyuzuki. She was operational by June 1944. She was torpedoed by an American submarine on October 12 and suffered medium damage. She escorted the carrier Junyo to Manila in November. She then returned to Japan and escorted Yamato on her April 1945 mission to Okinawa. She survived the operation with only light damage. She suffered heavy damage from a mine after the war and was not repaired. Hanazuki. She was operational by March 1945, but did not leave home waters. She was surrendered and turned over to the United States. Harutsuki. She was operational by March 1945 but did not leave home waters. She was surrendered and turned over to the Soviet Union. Hatsuzuki. She began fleet operations in March 1943 and was active as far south as Rabaul. She participated in the Battle of Philippine Sea in June 1944. She assigned to the Northern Force during the Battle of Light Gulf. She was sunk by gunfire from 4 cruisers and several destroyers on October 25. Natsuzuki. She hit a mine on June 16, 1945 after entering service. She was surrendered and turned over to Great Britain. Nizuki. She began fleet operations in May 1943. On July 5, she led a destroyer transport run to Columbangar in the Central Solomons. She launched part of an 1-mile torpedo strike, the longest of the war, which sank an American destroyer. The next day, she was sunk at the Battle of Kula Gulf by gunfire from 3 American cruisers. But by absorbing their attention, she allowed other Japanese destroyers to launch torpedoes and sink a light cruiser. Shimotsuki. She joined the fleet in June 1944 and participated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. In October, she participated in the Battle of Light Gulf and suffered moderate damage from bomb near misses. She was sunk by 3 torpedoes from the submarine USS Naval after departing Singapore in November 25, with only 46 survivors. Suzutsuki. She began fleet operations in March 1943 and conducted several missions to Rabaul through August. On January 16, 1944, she washed by 2 submarine-launched torpedoes that blew off her bow and stern, killing 135 crewmen. She returned to service in October, but on October 16 she was again hit by a submarine torpedo and lost part of her bow. She was assigned to escort the super battleship Yamato in April 1945. She was heavily damaged by her attack on April 7 and not fully repaired by the war's end. Teruzuki. Her first action was at the carrier Battle of Santa Cruz in October 1942, where she was slightly damaged by a bomb. She participated in the First Naval Battle of Guadalcanal on November 13, where she engaged several American ships. She damaged the destroyer USS Starrett. She returned 2 nights later in the Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal and engaged the battleship USS South Dakota. Teruzuki was undamaged in both actions. She was sunk by an American PT boat torpedo off Guadalcanal on the night of December 11 to 12 after fires reached the ship's depth charges and create massive explosions. Wakatsuki. She departed Japan in August 1943 for Truk and participated in the Battle off Empress Augusta Bay off Bougainville on November 2. She was involved in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 and later as part of the Northern Force during the Battle of Light Gulf in October. She was sunk by her attack near Ormoc, Light on November 11 with heavy loss of life. Yozuki. She was operational by May 1945, but did not leave home waters. She suffered light mine damage on June 5. She was surrendered and turned over to the nationalist Chinese, and was scrapped in 1963 Amatsu Tachibana class design and construction by 1942. The Japanese realized that heavy destroyer losses could not be made up by continuing the construction of large fleet units. The result was a design that was suitable for quick and mass production. This new class would be able to perform frontline transport duties, which would save the larger destroyers to operate with the fleet. Because these ships were envisioned as general escorts, their armament was on a reduced scale, as was their speed. Nevertheless, the Japanese still saw these units as capable of working with main fleet if required. These ships have been called destroyer escorts and compared to their American counterparts, but in fact they were larger than American destroyer escorts and better armed. The design of the new class, which came to be known as the Matsu class, stressed simplicity. This included the equipment on board, which was meant to be operated by crew members without the pre-war level of training. Whereas a Yugamo-class ship would take about a year to build, a Matsu-class destroyer could be completed in about 6 months. Another area of simplicity was the machinery that could only develop 19,000 St. Helena pounds, which translated to a top speed of just under 28 knots. It was thought that this would be sufficient for almost all required duties, but it was much less than previous destroyers, where speed was an area of design emphasis. The reduced length meant that only 2 boilers were fitted, and these were of a simpler design that did not operate at high temperatures and which drove less powerful turbines. One notable design feature was the separation of the boiler and the machinery rooms, so that a single hit could not knock out all propulsive power. 28 units of the original design were ordered, and work began in August 1943. In mid-1944, the last 10 were cancelled and replaced with a further simplified design known as the Tachibana class. The Japanese planned to build another 100 of the Tachibana units, but only another 13 were laid down until all construction was cancelled in favor of special attack units. Suzutsuki during Operation Tengo. Suzutsuki is shown in action during Operation Tengo, the final sortie of super battleship Yamato in April 1945. The ship has just taken a bomb hit forward on the starboard side, which caused a serious fire and flooding. The damage forced Suzutsuki to limp back to port stern first. She was only off the 4 destroyers to survive Yamato's last sortie, but suffered 57 dead and 30 wounded and was never repaired before the end of the war. The view also shows an Akazuki-class unit in a Lator configuration. Note that the No. 21 radar on the foremast has been replaced by a No. 22 radar in the platform and a second No. 13 higher up on the mast. The anti-aircraft fit was further reinforced by a third pair of 25mm triple mounts positioned abreast the bridge structure and additional single 25mm guns, for a final total of 19. The Tachibana class was even simpler, to facilitate quick production. The hull form was reduced to straight lines to avoid complex steel work and the bridge structure modified. Since the armament remained the same, the modified foremast which combined the mast and separate radar tower in the Matsu class became the primary distinguishing feature of the new class. Mild steel was used, which increased displacement by 50 tons. Armament and service modifications. Matsu class was well armed for a ship of its size. The primary offensive weapon was the quadruple torpedo launcher, but no reloads were carried. The main gun battery was changed from the 5-inch gun mounted on every destroyer since the Fubuki class to the Type 89 high-angle 5-inch gun that waste primary anti-aircraft gun on larger ships. A single mount was fitted forward and provided with only a partial anti-spray shield, and a dual mount was provided with no protection at all. However, the effectiveness of the Type 89 in an anti-aircraft role was reduced by the fact that there was no high-angle fire control director provided in the design. Anti-aircraft weaponry was heavy, with early production units having 4 triple mounts and usually 8 single 25mm guns. All units carried a No. 22 radar abaft of the bridge, and all except very early production ships were fitted with a No. 13 radar on the mainmast aft. Since the class was designed to act as anti-submarine screening ships, the units carried a large depth charge load that could be deployed by the Type 90 for projectors to stern racks, and 4 Type 3 depth charge loading stands. Since the class did not even start to reach the fleet until mid-1944, few modifications were conducted for the remainder of the war. By late 1944, the number of single 25mm guns was increased to 13, including one centerline abaft the second stack. A No. 13 radar was added on the mainmast off those units not previously fitted with it. The Tachibana class, entering service in 1945, was launched with both radars and 13 single 25mm guns. Later, as many as 19 single guns were fitted. One ship, had provisions set on her stern to launch a single chiton, or manned torpedo. Wartime service Matsu class ships made up destroyer divisions 43, 52, and 53. Given the time of their completion, few units saw extensive service bay in home waters. Hinoki began a series of escort missions in October 1944, mostly in Philippine waters. On January 5, 1945, she departed Manila for Indochina, but was intercepted by an Allied force led by the American destroyer USS Benyon. She was forced to turn back, and was damaged by air attack from American escort carriers. She attempted towed Port Manila again on January 7, was intercepted by 4 American destroyers, and sunk by gunfire with all hands. KED. She began operations in January 1945 by escorting a convoy to Hong Kong. On January 31, she was damaged by air attack south of Formosa, forced to return to Japan. She was surrendered and turned over to China, but did not enter service. Kashi. She was sent to southern waters in November 1944. She participated in the San Jose bombardment operation in December. She was damaged by carrier attack in Formosa in January 1945, and again later in Kure on July 28. She was surrendered and handed over to the United States. Kayo. She began a series of escort operations in November 1944. She participated in the San Jose bombardment in December. She returned to Japan and surrendered. She was handed over to the Soviet Union. Kiyiki. She did not leave home waters after entering service in March 1945. She surrendered and was turned over to the United States and later expended as a target. Kiri. She participated in the Battle of Light Gulf in October 1944, assigned to the Northern Force. Later she was active in the Southern area on escort duty. She escorted of the Matsu and Tachibana classes. The subject of the top and middle plates is Hinoki. She is a Matsu class unit and represents a late war October 1940 for configuration. The Matsu class was not an elegant design, but they were heavily armed for their size and demonstrated the ability to sustain severe damage. As completed, the ships fitted a single 5 inches gun forward and a twin mount aft. These were Type 89 high-angle guns, making them the only Japanese destroyer to carry this weapon. 4 triple 25mm mounts were fitted, along with a number of single 25mm guns. The bottom view is Tachibana as she appeared in January 1945 when completed. The ship was the lead unit in her class, which was a more basic version of the Matsu class. The primary visible difference between the two classes is the modified foremast. Note the absence of a dedicated radar tower for the No-22 radar on Tachibana Convoy to light, and suffered damage in an air attack on December 12. She returned to Japan and surrendered. She was turned over to the Soviet Union. Kyuo. She participated in the Battle of Light Gulf as part of the Northern Force. She was sunk by American destroyer gunfire in Norfolk Bay off-light on December 3, 1944. Maki. She participated in the Battle of Light Gulf as part of the Northern Force and was damaged by carrier attack. She was damaged again by a submarine-launched torpedo in December. She spent the remainder of the war in home waters. She surrendered and was handed over to Great Britain. Matsu. She was fully operational in July 1944. On a convoy escort mission to Chichijima, she was damaged by carrier aircraft and then sunk by destroyer gunfire on August 4, 1944. Momi. She began a series of escort missions in October 1944, mostly in Philippine waters. On January 5, 1945, she departed Manila for Indochina, but was intercepted by an Allied force led by the American destroyer Benyon. She was forced to turn back, and was sunk by air attack from American escort carriers. Momo. She entered service in July 1944. She operated primarily in Philippine waters from November until she was torpedoed and sunk off Luzon by the submarine USS Hawkbill on December 15. Nara. She was operational in March 1945. She was heavily damaged by a mine near Shimonoseki Strait on June 30 and not repaired by the war's end. She was surrendered and scrapped. Sakura. She commenced operations in February 1945 by escorting a convoy to Formosa. She returned to Japan in March and was sunk in Osaka Harbor on July 11 by a mine explosion that killed 130 of her crew. Sugi. She participated in the light operation assigned to the Northern Force. She escorted a convoy to light and suffered damage in an air attack on December 7. She was part of the San Jose bombardment operation in late December. She returned to Japan and surrendered. She was turned over to China and served until 1957. Take, the most successful ship of her class, Take was active off Okinawa, Palau, and then the Philippines from mid-1944. On October 24, she assisted in the sinking of the American submarine USS Shark II. She escorted 3 convoys from Manila to light in November-December 1944. She torpedoed and sunk an American destroyer on her 3rd mission. She returned to Japan, surrendered, and was turned over to Great Britain. Tsubaki. She escorted a convoy to Shanghai in February 1945. She was damaged by a mine in Chinese waters on April 10. She returned to Japan and was damaged by a carrier attack on July 24. She surrendered and was scrapped. From October 1944, she was active primarily in Philippine waters, including the escort of one convoy from Manila to Leyte in December. She was sunk by her attack on January 31, 1945 off Luzon, with 77 killed. Unagi. She was operational in March 1945 and assigned patrol duties in northern Japanese waters. She was heavily damaged by her attack near Tsugaru Strait on July 14 and again by her attack on August 9. She surrendered and was scrapped. Tachibana class was completed too late to see any service beyond home waters. Inoki. She was sunk by a mine in shallow water on June 26, 1945. Hagi. She was damaged by American carrier aircraft at Kure on July 24, 1945. She surrendered at the end of the war and was handed over to Great Britain. Hatsum. She was damaged by mine and air attack in home waters, but surrendered at the end of the war and was handed over to China, rearmed twice, and continued in service until the 1960s. Hatsuzakura, the most famous Tachibana-class ship, since she met units of the U.S. Third Fleet in Tokyo Bay on August 27, 1945 to make arrangements for the surrender ceremony on September 2. She surrendered and was handed over to the Soviet Union. Kaba. She was damaged by air attack on Kure on July 24 and August 31. She surrendered at the end of the war and was handed over to the United States. Kaki. She was damaged by air attack on Osaka on March 19. She surrendered at the end of the war and was handed over to the United States. Kusunoki. She surrendered at the end of the war and was handed over to Great Britain. Nashi. She was sunk by air attack near Kure on July 28, 1945. In 1955, the ship was refloated and was recommissioned into the Maritime Self-Defense Force on May 31, 1956, the only Imperial Navy ship to see service in Japan's post-war Navy. She remained in service until 1972 as a radar trial ship. Nair. She was damaged by B-29 air attack at Kure on June 22. She surrendered at the end of the war and was scrapped in 1948. Adake. She surrendered at the end of the war, was turned over the United States, and scrapped. She was damaged by a mine in June 1945. She surrendered and was handed over to the Soviet Union. Sumire. She surrendered and was handed over to Great Britain and expended as a target off Hong Kong in 1947. Tachibana. She was sunk by American carrier aircraft off Hokkaido on July 14, 1945. Tsudo. She surrendered and was handed over to China, but not put into service. Analysis and conclusion. The destroyers covered in this book represented the cream of the Imperial Navy's destroyer force. These ships were also some of the largest and most powerfully armed destroyers possessed by any navy. Nevertheless, as was clearly apparent with the Imperial Navy's earlier destroyers, these impressive ships had critical weaknesses. During the early part of the war, which included the Guadalcanal campaign, the weaknesses were not apparent. In fact, operating at night against American ships, the superb training and powerful torpedoes of the Japanese destroyers made them formidably adverse. During the Guadalcanal campaign, Japanese destroyers took relatively minor losses against American surface ships and accounted for an impressive toll of Allied ships. As the battle shifted to the Central and Northern Solomons, however, Japanese destroyers were no longer dominant, and by November 1943 they had lost their agile altogether as American destroyer commanders employed their ships aggressively, fully exploited their key technological advantage in radar, and gained faith in their torpedoes. In 1944, there were few surface clashes until October, when the series of large battles known collectively as the Battle for Light Gulf confirmed the inability of Japanese destroyers to adapt to combat conditions during this period of the war. In 3 surface clashes, Japanese destroyers were ineffective or defeated by American surface forces. Of the astounding total of 28 Japanese destroyers covered in this book that were lost during 1944, almost all were sunk by submarine and air attack. In the final analysis, the deficiencies in anti-aircraft and anti-submarine warfare capabilities spelled disaster for the Japanese destroyer force. The table below provides the causes of loss of the 93 Japanese destroyers covered in this book. Not surprisingly, the leading cause of loss was air attack. The number of losses to surface attack was also high, and reflected the fact that these ships bore the burden of conducting operations in 1943 in the Solomons, where they faced an increasingly powerful and numerous American surface fleet. Other causes include 6 losses to mines and 2 instances of a combined loss to aircraft and surface ships. Losses built throughout war, with only 5 in 1942, 19 in 1943, 28 in 1944, and 11 in 1945. The most telling statistic of all is that, of the 48 ships that made up the ratio and the type of classes, only a single ship survived the war. This alone confirms the bitter nature of the combat that Japanese destroyers were forced to fight.